essential things to realize is that setting yourself free from guilt has to be something you do for yourself, because even if you apologize to someone, like say the thing you're guilty about involves another person, even if that person forgives you and that gives you permission to move on, you might find yourself later on or currently in a situation where someone doesn't forgive you for what you did and where you did really fuck things up in a bad way. But the thing is, feeling guilty about it doesn't change it. And if you want to move forward and do better, you want to be showing up as your best self. And you can't be showing up as your best self if you're feeling like you're constantly beating yourself up over something that's in the past and that there's nothing that can be done to change it. Hello, I am just taking a little walk in the woods because I needed a digital break. But I wanted to talk to you about something that I was writing about this morning, which is that your guilt is not making you a better person. And I'm someone who has struggled so much with guilt and shame, and taking those feelings as, rather than symptoms of something else going on, I took them as indications and proof that I was a bad person. And anyone who's struggled with OCD knows that shame and guilt are such a huge part of having obsessive compulsive disorder. But for years and years and years, I didn't have a diagnosis. I wasn't on meds. I wasn't in therapy specifically for OCD, which made all the difference. And then, also struggling with my sexuality and realizing that I wasn't straight. And then you have eating disorders and, diet culture making you feel guilty for eating something, even though it's so weird to me that emotional eating is like demonized as one of the worst things that can happen. When if you think about a lot of the things that people do to cope when they're feeling very emotional, like drinking or drugs or like partying or sleeping with people even though they know it will ultimately be bad for them mentally, or self-harm, like whatever it is, eating is not like the worst thing. And so like obviously if it's a habitual thing, that's something that you probably need to get help for. But every now and again it's like, why are we feeling guilty for eating? I remember in recovery early on kind of seeing this thing that said the only food you should be guilty about is food that you stole from someone else. And you know what? Even then, sometimes people deserve it. But anyway, the subject of guilt is something that I have so much experience with, even if it was misguided. But, and when I talk about this, I think some people might write my experience off as being like, oh, well, you felt guilty for like having bad thoughts because of OCD, or for eating, and those things aren't things that are actually wrong, so it doesn't compare to my shame, which comes from something that I actually did. But I just want to say, even if our shame and our guilt is not the same, they know each other, okay? And because the experience is similar. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. And obviously there are things I've done that are actually bad. Like the worst thing I have ever done, I'll tell you. I had such bad OCD that I wasn't being skillful with, and I fell out of practice with using my tools, and I had a short fling with somebody, and then I became so scared that they were gonna get sick, or that I had done something that would make them sick, or that they were for some reason like in danger, because OCD doesn't have to make sense. Like you can be scared of anything. And so I kept checking in on them, and I kept being like, hey, is this okay? Are you okay? Are you? And obviously the behavior itself is like so toxic, because it's like if someone ends things with you, you should not keep talking to them, especially if they don't want you to. And once they didn't want me to, I still sent an apology. And I feel really bad about that, because the apology wasn't intended for them to forgive me. It was so that they would understand that the story my brain was telling me was that they were unsafe and that they were in danger, and that I wasn't using my tools that I normally use to keep that from taking over. And I think when you have anything that you struggle with mentally, it's very easy for that thing to become the third person in a relationship, like assuming the relationship is between two people. And for so long, my OCD would just become the third person because I would be obsessive about asking the same questions over and over and over again. And even if the intention was to keep that person safe and healthy and out of danger, it has still been annoying to past partners because you're asking the same thing over and over and over again. So regardless of your intentions or where it's coming from, the behavior is still an annoyance, and I totally understand that. And so those are things that I feel a lot of guilt about because I wasn't being skillful and I let people get to know my anxiety before I let them get to know me. And that's just something that I have to live with. But the thing about guilt is it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't necessarily change the future. And you could argue that, like, oh, you need to feel guilty because of punishment and you have to punish yourself for what you did wrong. And yes, you're allowed to feel your guilt and feel that sense of punishment. But I think at a certain point, sometimes we are still punishing ourselves in a way that doesn't necessarily match the crime. Like, not that there's an actual crime, but like, and so that's something that I want you to ask yourself is like, is this amount of punishment the same amount of punishment that I would give a friend or someone that I love if they had made the same mistake I did? And oftentimes the answer is no. All you can do is learn everything you can from the situation, and if it involves another person, apologize, unless you feel like that apology will be for you and not for the other person. Because all of us have been wronged by someone, and then that person comes back into our lives like 6 months later and is like, I'm sorry for what happened. And it's like, I just don't want to hear from you. And you know what? As hard as it might be to deal with, some people probably don't want to hear from you. And if you've harmed someone or done something to upset somebody, sometimes an apology is helpful because it can mend the relationship. But if you know that this apology is not to give the other person closure, but to assuage your own guilt that you have, I don't think it's worth getting back into that person's life, because ultimately that's selfish. And I mean, we've all been selfish. We've all probably done that before and like apologized to someone or tried to make amends or whatever with someone who we know didn't want to. But sometimes, you know, for whatever reason, a lot of us have probably made that mistake. I've had people make that mistake at me. I know it's a very human thing. But I think one of the essential things you have to realize to move on is that if your guilt is stemming from a situation with another person, you have to move on with your life and try to do better, regardless of whether or not mosquito. One of the essential things to realize is that setting yourself free from guilt has to be something you do for yourself, because even if, you know, you apologize to someone, like say the thing you're guilty about involves another person, even if that person forgives you and that gives you permission to move on, you might find yourself later on or currently in a situation where someone doesn't forgive you for what you did and where you did really fuck things up in a bad way. But the thing is, feeling guilty about it doesn't change it. And if you want to move forward and do better, you want to be showing up as your best self. And you can't be showing up as your best self if you're feeling like you're constantly beating yourself up over something that's in the past and that there's nothing that can be done to change it. And I know it's so hard to let go. And there's this feeling of like, if you punish yourself enough, one day you'll be set free. But that's not how it works. That's not how it works at all. And sometimes you have to learn to move on, even when you've wronged someone and they don't forgive you. Because if how you feel about yourself or your mistake is resting on what someone else thinks of you, you're putting your self-worth and self-esteem in something outside of yourself, which is ultimately unsustainable and not a pattern that you want to start. And so I don't know if that makes sense, but sometimes you have to forgive yourself even if someone else doesn't forgive you. And I know it's like the hardest thing in the world, but yeah, those are my thoughts that I wanted to share today. I've just been out. Today I did some writing. I had a piece on Substack that got really popular, and at first it was like, oh, okay, people are being nice, but then it got some hate, and that was kind of difficult for me. But you know, I've had a video on here. I had a video about the internal male gaze blow up like 4 years ago, and even when I'm getting positive attention, if there's a lot of it, I get really stressed out. And so, and then of course even more so when it's negative, like people saying criticism, which sometimes is completely valid, but honestly, when you're talking about feminist issues, a lot of the criticism you get is from like conservative men who probably, I can only assume, watch Andrew Tate and Joe Rogan. But anyway, I just needed a little digital break. And it's so beautiful today. And I brought my little camera and I took some pictures. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful for you in some way. And yeah, I'll see you next time.